welcome to Girls Lunch, your mealtime companion where we talk about food, gender, sexuality, and where everyone is welcome.
I'm Julia Andreas.
I'm Nicole Hilton.
And welcome to NPR. No, I'm just kidding.
Ira Glass, is that you?
So, Nicole, when you are grocery shopping, what produce do you usually pick up at the grocery store?
Now, this is very topical for me because I just got back from the grocery store probably about an hour ago. I mean, I usually get... Ryan doesn't eat fruit, but I try to eat fruit. So I will usually get... This is so sad. Like a fruit. Not like one apple, but like a pint of blueberries. Or like a pack of strawberries, you know, because it's just me. And then I'd say several vegetables. You know, some heads of broccoli, some... zucchinis, green beans, perhaps.
I feel like that's, pretty average for the normal American consumer.
Was I right? Did I answer? Did I do a good job?
You get a star.
Wow.
You get A+. You did
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm grocery shopping, as you know, like, I have a very vegetable and fruit-heavy diet because I just eat a lot of it. And David does too. But yeah, we'll get, like, a couple of different fruits, like maybe grapes and some apples, or maybe like some oranges, a pineapple if we feel fancy. And then like the vegetables that we always get are things like carrots, celery, onions, garlic,
Yeah.
Basic.
See, you said that and I didn't even, like, those are just such standard in my house to always have a bag of carrots, potatoes, onions, garlic that I didn't even think about.
It's just like everyone... I feel like picks those up. It's just very basic in American cooking. But actually very little, if anything, that is in a grocery store today is native to America. And even the American native foods like corn, potatoes, and tomatoes are variants so far removed from their original forms. Like tomatoes specifically, the kind of tomatoes that we have in grocery stores today, that variant was brought over from, like, Italy, right? So, like, tomatoes went to Italy, then they were grown there for a long time, and then Americans went over to Italy and brought that kind of tomato back. Or Italians brought that kind of tomato back with them when they immigrated to America.
I see.
So, like, the original North American tomato is definitely, like, not the same as, like, our current day grocery store tomato.
Is it more like an heirloom tomato? Where it's kind of bumpy? Or...
Well, just like smaller, tartar.
Oh, okay.
Not as red, stuff like that.
I see.
But yeah, I mean, like, this is true for a lot of different produce things that we have in the grocery store. Like Florida oranges, originally from China.
Oh.
Bananas. Any banana from any grocery store. That kind of banana comes from Papua New Guinea. Washington State apples, originally from Kazakhstan. Napa Valley grapes are from Caucasus, which is an area of countries that includes Armenia and Georgia and parts of southern Russia. It's like a specific valley. So, like, really the gallery of produce that we have on grocery store shelves is not only, like, none of it came there naturally, right? But it's also only a fraction of the amounts of actual produce that exists in the world with, like, variants and other species and such. Like, there are multiple kinds of pineapples. There are multiple kinds of oranges and other citrus fruits. There are multiple kinds of celery that we just don't have available in a normal American grocery store for various different reasons, like capitalism.
Right.
Capitalism.
And yet we have, like, 80 varieties of wheat thins.
Exactly. And, like, 200 Oreos.
Yeah, but there's one kind of pineapple.
But there's only one kind of pineapple, yeah. And I think, like, good lord, this is a topic that I could, A, yell about forever, and B, is so huge that, like, we're not gonna get too deep into modern... I say too deep. We're not really gonna touch, like, modern botany at all, because that is, like, its own episode with Monsanto, GMOs, stuff like that. I feel like that's gonna be its own episode.
Right.
But before we talk about, like, what is actually in scope for this episode, Nicole, would you read this nice quote in purple for us from Daniel Stone, the author of one of the books I read for this podcast, The Food Explorer?
Ooh, okay. We tend to think of food from the ground as a type of environmental entitlement that predates humans, a connection with the raw planet itself. But what we eat is no less curated than a museum exhibit. Oh, I'm very intrigued by this.
Yeah, so that's going to set us up for essentially the first part of our episode. Today we're actually going to work backwards a little bit. We're going to start with David Fairchild, who is a very important botanist, and his rise and fall in food exploration in America. And then for our wiggy time, we're going to go back a little bit before Fairchild's time to meet an equally important botanist, Jeanne Barat. I think I'm saying that right. She's French.
Okay, I was going to say, is she en français?
She is en français, and there's going to be a lot of French names, and I'm going to do my best.
Hon, baguette.
Trigger warning to French people, I guess. Also, just to make this disclaimer, we're not talking about botany of desire. Get that pollen nonsense out of my house.
I don't even know what it is, so sure, get it out of here. Michael Pollan, you have plenty of other media exposure.
But we are going to talk about American agriculture in the late 19th century. So, late 19th century, food in America was still horrendously boring. It consisted mainly of what English settlers used to eat when they first came here. Meat and cheese, and the occasional root vegetable if you lived somewhere where it would grow.
It's giving Kirsten's many varieties of meats and cheeses in the American Girl cookbook.
It is giving Kirsten the American Girl. So America's food culture at the time, since it was so meat and cheese heavy, was what gave us Kellogg's cereal and the graham cracker. High fiber, low flavor, absolutely no horniness allowed. Like this was 1800s. America was like, you can't be constipated or horny.
No.
That's a failure, a moral failure.
Yeah.
And the agricultural landscape in America at the time was like, just as bland and unsexy.
How do we make it sexy?
Well, it gets more unsexy before it starts to get sexy.
Okay, sure. Right.
So post-Civil War, farming increased because, people were out of the war and more food was needed. And there was the expansion out west, so you had more land for farming. Really, all people could do out there was farm. And so with that came, a flood of wheat and beef and, citrus that was hitting eastern markets. And supply eclipsed demand and an agricultural depression happened. And so to survive, farmers needed to become competitive, as producing food was now more of a business and not just for survival. And so this is kind of why it was so monotonous across American farming landscape, was because, as Daniel Stone puts it, that competition didn't make for agricultural diversity. Attempting to grow new crops to outmaneuver your neighbor is simply too risky in farming, where uncertain environmental factors favor the familiar over the unknown. So basically, to farm anything new was a risk not worth taking when you were just trying to sell enough to keep yourself afloat and survive.
Right.
And so, David Fairchild, our first botanist that we'll talk about today, was born into this culinary wonderscape in April 1869 on the plains of Lansing, Michigan, to Charlotte Pearl Halstead and George Fairchild. George Fairchild, his dad, was president of the State Agricultural College of Michigan and taught the practical aspects of growing food as part of his professorship. He was super well known in his field, and George even had connections with Alfred Russel Wallace, who is the guy who Darwin beat out for the theory of natural selection.
Ah.
If you don't know, Wallace was also studying natural selection at the same time, and he actually published first, but Darwin had more marketing, so his was more well known. And so little David Fairchild actually got to meet Wallace when he was very young, and he was like awestruck by him. He thought he was like so cool, and he loved hearing his tales of traveling. He loved hearing all about Wallace's time in Java, which is a island in Indonesia, and it became David Fairchild's lifelong dream to visit the small island. So David's passion for plants was seeded at an early age. As a young man, he moved to Washington, D.C. to be a junior scientist for the Department of Agriculture.
Nice. A
little background on the Department of Agriculture. It was established in 1862 by President Lincoln. At the time, its goal was to increase the number of calories Americans ate each day. It was like, the Department of Agriculture's got one job. We gotta get Americans healthy and heavy. They gotta eat more.
Well, because this is also, like, 1862, so this is, like, Civil War times.
Yeah.
And also coming out of slavery, when a lot of your agriculture is dependent on the labor of enslaved people. You then have to figure out, like, how are we going to make this system work? And also how to get people to not starve.
Exactly. Like, we gotta solve the labor problem and the food scarcity problem. By the time Fairchild had gotten there, the goal of the USDA had, like, shifted from how do we get people to eat more to how do we help farmers solve issues with their crops. They've got a pest. How do we help them figure out how to get rid of it? Or, like, weird fungus stuff, or, like, it won't grow there, or whatever.
Right.
And Fairchild enjoyed his work, but he really wanted more. After a stint representing the USDA at the Chicago World's Fair.
Oh.
I know, right?
We've been there.
We have been there.
The show has been there.
There's a lot of cameos in this episode. Fairchild had the opportunity to work in Naples, Italy, as, like, part of a branch of the USDA. This trip would be how he met Barber Lathrop, who is an extremely wealthy man, financially independent, who would become both a father figure to Fairchild and, more importantly, a financial sponsor for his food exploration trips as they circumnavigated the world together.
Love a sugar daddy.
He really was.
Yeah.
And he was, like, we can't confirm, of course, because this is, like, over 100 years ago, but, like, Lathrop was probably a gay man. He identified as, like, a bohemian man, and he went to these, like, bohemian clubs. In retrospect, they were definitely, like, the 1800s equivalent of, like, a gay bar.
Yeah. Some gay activities were occurring.
Yeah, like, if you use your critical thinking brain, you're like, yeah, he was gay. But we can't ever confirm that for sure because he is long dead.
Right.
And he never said anything about it. But he never married, and he had no interest in women.
I wish I could have hung out with him.
Yeah, he was apparently a real big jerk, though. So.
Aw, okay. Well, are you telling me people with a lot of money are not always nice?
In fact, they can often be very entitled. It's shocking, I know.
Wow.
But he really was the one who kind of gave Fairchild the idea and the push to collect plants for use in America. Like, as they were traveling the world, it was kind of aimless. It was like, we're just looking at stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Lathrop was like, well, you could actually probably take the stuff and then see how we can use it back in the US for, like, progress and growth and things. And Fairchild was like, whoa, that's a great idea.
I love the idea of, prior to that, they were just, like, a couple of guys just, like, sailing around, just taking a lot of notes, drawing a lot of field sketches, you know?
More or less, really. After traveling with Lathrop, and he did finally make it to Java, Fairchild returned to DC with a new goal to create a program that introduces American farmers to new and better varietals of fruits and vegetables. So Fairchild made his case to the USDA, and with the help of his colleagues, they created the Office of Seed and Plant Introduction. And in this branch of the USDA, botanists would travel in search of plant varieties that could be grown in the U.S. and could be profitable for farmers. Their home base in D.C. would catalog the specimens that were shipped back by these explorers and pass them on to farmers and experimenters to see how they do on American soil and if they could be, like, improved upon and grown for profit and things.
That's so cool. Number one, that sounds like a really cool job. Like, imagine you're just a guy who gets to go and travel and look at cool plants. I would be really bad at this because I kill plants, but I also think a really interesting part of that job is like, well, something you have to be keeping in mind is not just like, wow, look at that cool plant, but like, is this something that would be profitable?
Yeah.
Because capitalism. But also, is this something that would be profitable in America? Like, is this something that American tastes would like?
Yeah, it does definitely take like 2 different steps, right? It's like you have to find something that will grow successfully on American soil, and then you have to convince people to eat it.
That's true too.
But yeah, just like you said, like food exploration is twofold in that sense. Like finding workable crops demanded educated guesses about like what growing conditions the plant would need in America. But even in like favorable environments, the guesses still amounted to gambles.
Right.
It's like you could have a plant on the same latitude, but the soil in America is just going to be different. It was never like guaranteed that it will grow on American soil. And collecting plants was all well and good. It was like really convincing American farmers to grow the new crops. That was the challenging part. And then like also people eating them as like the third challenging part.
I mean, maybe this is just me and my like total lack of gardening skills, but I'm like, you have to keep the plant alive.
Yeah.
On the whole boat ride home. Like
that
feels very like I just bought a new betta fish at PetSmart and I have to get it home in this little bag and get it into a tank, you know, and hope it doesn't die somewhere in between.
And like Fairchild and the other explorer botanists, like they would just ship them back. They wouldn't travel with them back. And so it's like you have to pack them so carefully.
Yeah.
They would put them in wet moss and things like that to have them keep for the entire voyage across the Atlantic or Pacific or wherever they were to like make it to DC. And then from DC, they would have to go to like Florida, California, New Mexico. So they would ship back so many specimens because so many of those would not make it to like the end destination. But luckily for Fairchild, like new food was super trendy. Anything that was like not meat or cheese or potatoes, people were like,
true.
Oh my gosh, what is this? I want to try it. Like, oh, exploration, the new world, so fancy. I wanna try everything. So it was like not as hard as it could have been in other times to get people to be willing to experiment with new things.
If you've only ever eaten meat and cheese and maybe potatoes before, an orange is gonna seem crazy, you know?
Oh yeah, or like a mangosteen.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Food exploration also required a lot of diplomacy. You were in other countries, sometimes legally, sometimes not so. Like, sometimes David Fairchild literally just did steal plants. He would just, like, run into a grove and be like, snip, snip, I've got your orange tree. The branches, I'm gonna run out of here.
I do wonder, maybe you're gonna talk about this, but, like, the legality of that? Like, who owns a plant? Who owns a plant species? I mean, maybe that is sort of getting into, like, GMO type stuff, or that changes later, but, like, I mean, sure, certainly if you're, like, you know, in someone's private field, that's one thing, but I'm just picturing, like, if you're out in the jungles of Brazil, who owns those cocoa beans or whatever?
Yeah, but this was, like, really before any sort of, like, plant patent was a thing, right?
That's true, yeah.
And so, like, yeah, if he was on someone's property, like their orange orchard taking oranges, obviously that's just stealing. But if it's just like you're walking around and you find a cool plant and you take it, it's not really all that different from just like picking a dandelion, right? At least at the time. Because it was also the height of imperialism.
I was just gonna say that, yeah.
And, like, America was like, we want to take over Cuba and the Philippines and other places.
For the greater good.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, you know, the height of exploration and the golden age of travel is also coincides with imperialism, but it also makes it easy to just take plants. But, like, also, instead of just, like, stealing plants, you could also try and find and connect with researchers and enthusiasts around the globe who could serve as correspondents and who would be like super willing and eager to contribute like cuttings and seeds and things because, you know, this was a time where America was like pretty neat. And to contribute to the growth of American agriculture was like a cool thing to do.
Imagine.
I know, right?
That sounds very cute, though. I imagine just like a club of, this is definitely oversimplifying things, but I imagine like a club of botanists just around the world, and they're like, hey, I heard about your project. Here's some cool seeds from where I'm from. Okay, thanks. You know?
I mean, like, so it was kind of like that. Fairchild kept so many connections with these other botanists he met through his life that, like, he would be like, hey, remember when I bought that cherry tree from you that one time back in, like, whatever, when I was in Japan? Mm-hmm. I want some for my house in DC. Can I buy more? And the guy's like, yeah, here you go. Here, take them. Take all of them. And then there's, like, also times he would have to, like, do under the table botany exchanges, like, for hops in Bavaria, where it was, like, at the time, American beer was, like, notoriously, horrendously bad.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, Fairchild was in Bavaria to try and figure out why their beer was so good and get some of their hops. And he made friends with this one farmer guy who was like, you're here for the hops, aren't you?
Yeah.
And Fairchild was like, yeah. And the guy was like, well, I like you, so I'm going to give you some, but it didn't come from me.
Oh, nice.
So it definitely was, like, risky, but also, like, adventurous and, you know, making connections with people and also trying not to get in trouble with the law.
See, now I'm like, where's their heist movie? Where's their Ocean's 11 style? Not necessarily, like, one big heist, but, like, where's their, like, action movie, Mission Impossible-ish?
Oh, yeah.
They're jet setting. They're well, not jets, but they're ship setting. Voyaging across the world. Getting plants here and plants there. Making secret deals. Stealing stuff.
I feel like this could be made into a great, like, Hollywood B-list movie.
Yeah, very summer action movie, I would say.
But even for, like, two wealthy white men, the world traveling was not without its dangers. Lathrop almost died from yellow fever, and Fairchild caught typhoid fever in what is now known as Sri Lanka, and they both almost died at different times. So even though, like, they were protected by their wealth and status, germs don't care.
And they weren't protected by vaccines yet, either.
Nope. There is a excerpt where Fairchild is in, I think it's Italy or something, and they're, like, in his, like, guide or whatever this guy is talking to is like, oh, if you want to go to this other place, you should go to the old man up there on that hill and get inoculated for smallpox. And Fairchild's like, okay, and so he goes up there, and the guy who does the inoculation, like, literally will, like, scrapes the scab of, like, a cow that has cowpox and is like, dang, let me put it in your bloodstream.
It is wild that is, like, actually how vaccines work. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. And Fairchild was like, no thank you. And then the author was like, but he actually probably should have done it because it would have protected him from smallpox more.
Yeah, and you thought it was bad when you go to get a shot at the doctor and they don't give you a sticker, you know?
I know, right?
They used to just have to put a whole cowpox in your blood.
I would take a vaccine of today anytime.
Yep.
In comparison. So after coming back from he and Lathrop's, like, second or third world traveling journey, America was looking a little different to Fairchild. By 1900, the U.S. was entering a brand new era, quote, one with the largest industrial economy, largest agricultural economy, and the highest per capita income, and the highest level of educations humans had ever seen. Early 1900s America was this complete boom of wealth and agriculture and economy, and it was kind of like something that had, like, never really been seen before. Nicole, could you please read the paragraph in purple?
In the elections of that year, one New York senator exclaimed that, quote, there is not a man here who does not feel 400% bigger in 1900 than he did in 1896. Bigger intellectually, bigger hopefully, bigger patriotically, bigger in the breast from the fact that he is a citizen of a country that has become a world power for peace, for civilization, for the expansion of its industries, and the products of its labor. Do you think 400% is a statistical number? Where's that number come? I would like a source. Where's that number come from?
What did that hot dog guy say? That it feels true?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, actually, of like, what I say may not be true in terms of words, but it's true emotionally.
Exactly. I think that is a emotional statistic that is 100% accurate. But yeah, like we mentioned earlier, during this golden age of travel and imperialism, it was like the world is only getting bigger and better for everyone. Quotes on everyone, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, David Fairchild in his Office of Seed and Plant Introduction had a really good 10 years. The branch of the USDA grew from 3 people to 4,000.
Wow.
Fairchild, during this time, married the daughter of Alexander Graham Bell.
Okay.
And enjoyed DC socialite life. He met Teddy Roosevelt, the president.
Sure.
He knew several other very famous scientists at the time.
He's the real man about town.
Yeah, he knew the Wright brothers. Like,
oh.
It's like the people that come up in his story, you're like, him too?
Yeah.
Oh, him? Also?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
All these people were all in DC at this time. It's just so crazy.
They didn't have remote work back then, you know?
No.
Everybody had to come to the office.
But this was also the time period where Frank Meyer came into the picture. He was hired by Fairchild to explore the depths of China in search of unknown plants. And most famously, it's where we get the Meyer lemon from, among many other things. And then, you know, they're riding this high of the Gilded Age, and then everything changed when xenophobia attacked. So with the introduction of these new plants, also came the introduction of new bugs and pests that were brought in on those plants.
Right.
And this, coupled with many other factors, contributed to a moral panic in the U.S. about bringing unknown dangers onto American soil.
Yes. Yeah. This happens a lot when you have large waves of immigration, you know. Mm-hmm. We just don't know who they are. What are they bringing with them? It's dangerous, different, and scary.
Oh yeah. I've got a great quote for you coming right up. So, a bug scientist guy, as I have in my notes, because I apparently was not bothered to look up what a bug scientist is called.
Is it an entomologist?
I think it's an entomologist. Marlott. He happened to be a childhood friend of Fairchild, but he hated all of the new plants coming in. He loathed all of this newfangled immigration. He stated, "The greatest danger is often something you do not know about. It is the unknown things that you cannot find that we have to protect this country from."
Wow.
And I'm like, oh wow, did one of our political people say that
Yeah,
today?
I was going to say, like, wow, I'm so glad that things have changed so much in the last 120 years and things are different now.
Oh yeah.
And, you know?
It's going to get real familiar here real fast.
Oh, buddy.
So, like, the golden age of travel had also been the golden age of transport and moving everything across oceans with unprecedented volume and speed. Fairchild would argue, right, that, like, this was great, that the world was going towards greater intercourse, more trade of commodities, and, like, less isolation. Like, we are all gaining from this communication and all of this, like, globalization. However, because of this moral panic that U.S. was having at the time, globalization had gone from, like, super exciting to absolutely terrifying. There was a steady rise of, quote, nationalism, xenophobia, and cultural insecurity brought about by a more connected world.
Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't know anything about that. Like I said, it's really good that it's really different today and much better.
I just think, like, it's so, when I was reading this book, I'm like, the parallel is so incredibly interesting, right? Like,
yeah.
Today we are experiencing a rise of nationalism, xenophobia, and cultural insecurity brought about by a more connected world.
Yeah, exactly.
The internet.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
It's like, nothing is new under the goddamn sun.
Nope.
It really is, like, a striking parallel, which does not help my optimism, because of the fact that the rise in xenophobia, the 1900s, brought us to World War I.
Yay!
Yay! And World War I killed Fairchild's life work. So It is very sad. With, like, the country having no resources, no time, no money, and was a nation recovering from wartime, they turned their attention away from exploration and more towards just rebuilding and survival. No one was interested in new plants. They just wanted to know how to make the most of the crops that they had. And so, like, the Office of Plant and Seed Introduction, like, eventually just was brushed away.
Oh.
The Fairchild fought so hard to, like, stop this from happening. But just, like, the way that culture was at the time, post-World War I, there just really wasn't a place for him anymore in that sphere.
That makes me really sad. I know this man has probably been dead for like 100 years, but I want to tell him, like, but I think your work is cool and important, you know?
Yeah, and it really is sad because, like, he brought so much to the American agricultural system, right? Like, so much of what we have in our grocery store stems from his really tireless work, like traveling for years, organizing all this stuff, like his absolute passion. But even like after the death of his life's work, Fairchild continued to live like a super long, comfortable life with his wife. They spent most of it in Florida because it reminded him of his beloved Java.
Aww.
And he died in August of 1954 under a Javanese ficus tree in his garden.
Poetic justice.
Mm-hmm. And this is, like, definitely not relevant to the episode, but, like, David Fairchild and his wife's love story is so cute.
Aww.
It's so cute. His wife was a art historian. Like, she was, like, very well versed in art at the time, and she was Alexander Graham Bell's daughter. And Bell wanted to set up Fairchild with his daughter because he was, like, you know, Fairchild's very intellectual. He's a scientist. He has traveled everywhere. He's, like, very put together. He would be a good match for my younger daughter. And so he set them up, and Fairchild was, like, head over heels for her instantly. He was like, she's so eloquent and smart and passionate, and I just want to listen to her talk about art all the time. It's, like, super cute. And so they courted for, like, 3 months or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And then she went on, like, a trip to New York to do some, like, art stuff. Mm-hmm. And he secretly followed her so that, like, on her way back to D.C., he would be on the same train as her. Aww. And so he surprised her on the train with, like, flowers, and instead of an engagement ring, it was, like, this necklace made out of, like, different jewels and things he had brought back from his travels.
Ooh, nice.
He proposed to her.
Did everybody on the train clap? I hope everybody on the train clapped.
Yeah. His wife's favorite story of Fairchild's explorations was when he went to Japan and brought home flowering cherry trees, which she called cherry blossoms, which is how we have the term cherry blossoms. And then when they bought their first house together, they, like, wanted to have all these beautiful gardens. And so, since cherry trees and cherry blossoms were her favorite, right, he had to get them for her.
Right.
And so he filled his property with cherry blossoms. And they were so popular that other people would come hang out on his property to, like, look at the cherry blossoms. And because, like, people thought that they were so cool, the blossoms at Fairchild's house, other people started buying them. And then it got to a point where the U.S. wanted to fix relations with Japan. And so they were like, why don't we do, like, a tree exchange? And since cherry blossoms did so well in D.C. and were so popular in D.C., they enlisted David Fairchild to organize the exchange of cherry blossoms from Japan, and then we gave them dogwood trees, I think.
Which are nice.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's because his wife's favorite flower was the cherry blossom that we have cherry blossoms around the
Tidal Basin.
Thank you, the Tidal Basin today.
That's so cool. I have been to the DC Cherry Blossom Festival a couple of times and truly love it. And my grandpa always gripes about, like, anytime it's cherry blossom season, because he's like, there's so many people. They're just coming to see a bunch of trees. And I'm like, but they're beautiful. They're so pretty.
Yeah. The cherry blossom trees that we have there today are just clones of the ones that were original to be planted. It's like if any, like, start getting old or die, they're just cloned with cutting off branches. And it's pretty dang neat. And this is another tangent to the tangent.
That's okay.
But the first batch of cherry blossoms that Japan shipped to the U.S. was infested with pests.
Oh.
They had to just burn all of them.
Oh, wow.
And so the U.S. was, like, so worried about how Japan was going to take this news because, like, we had to burn your whole shipment as a gift to us. And you went around and you found, like, all of your best cherry blossom trees.
Yeah.
And we had to burn them because they were infested. Like, what? They're going to be so mad. But instead, like, David Fairchild broke the news to, like, the representative from Japan. And the guy was like, oh, my God, I am so sorry. Like, mortified. And so they sent, like, a whole second shipment. But yeah, I highly recommend reading The Food Explorer. It is a very fun book. The food accomplishments of, like, what we have in grocery stores today that can be traced back to the varietals that David Fairchild brought over are red seedless grapes from Italy, the hops from Bavaria, kale from Croatia, wheat from Spain, citron from Corsica, pomegranate from Malta, Egyptian cotton from Egypt, dates from Iraq, nectarines from Afghanistan, dwarf pineapple from South Africa, watermelon from Chile, avocado from Chile, papaya from Ceylon, peach from China, Meyer lemon from China, cherry blossom from Japan, mango from Vietnam, mangosteen from Indonesia, the island of Java, soybean from Indonesia, pistachios, wasabi, water chestnuts, and Carolina rice, to name a few.
That's so many things.
Yeah.
And they're all like, I think the only thing on here I'm like, I don't know what that is a mangosteen.
They did not pick up. It's so funny. It was David Fairchild's favorite fruit of all time.
And he just really was like, you guys, it's so good. Why aren't you into, like, mangosteens are amazing. And they're like,
They're like, we don't want to farm this. This is, like, not worth it. So it's no wonder that, like, it's not a very popular thing in America.
Is it related to mangoes?
No.
Oh.
I know.
What is it? I'm gonna look up a picture.
Yeah, look up a picture.
Oh, what? This looks like a Pokemon fruit. This looks like a fruit you see in anime.
Yeah.
This doesn't look real.
So yeah, he introduced it to the U.S. and everyone was like, no thanks.
Yeah. They were like, this looks like something from One Piece. I don't think so.
I don't think so. We don't see that one in U.S. supermarkets unless you're at, like, a Whole Foods. And then it's probably imported.
Cool.
But now that we are done with our first botanist, I think it's time for our food fact of the day.
I think it is indeed. So let us go.
Let's go.
I love when this happens because I pick the food fact independently of whatever you are doing the whole topic on, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa. We don't necessarily know what the other person's doing the food fact on.
Yeah.
But I love that we share the same brain and things, like, really line up sometimes. I think it's interesting that we were talking a lot about, like, world powers and, like, negotiating between nations and things like that, because that is kind of also what our food fact of the day is about.
Oh-ho!
So I have been thinking a lot about government power lately.
Well, why? Why, Nicole? Why would you do that?
No reason. No real reason. Nothing in specific that's happening right now. So there's obviously, like, hard power, right, that governments have, which is, like, your army, president, the law. But have you ever heard the term soft power, Julia?
I have not. It sounds like a genre of punk rock.
It does sound like a music genre. So soft power is actually a term that refers to how governments will exert power and influence over the world and world culture in ways outside of those, like, typical, when we think of, like, typical forms of power, right? Mm-hmm. I've been thinking about soft power a lot lately. Anytime my beloved Washington Capitals hockey team plays a Canadian team, because there are Canadian teams that are in the National Hockey League, because lately Canadians have been booing the U.S. national anthem.
Honestly, as they should.
Yeah, because they don't want to be America's 51st state or whatever the fuck. And I can't blame them, you know? I'm like, that's fair, you know? So,
I too would boo the American national anthem.
So sports, as I've just said, are one way that countries can exert this, like, soft power. But another one which is much more germane to this show, is food. Mm-hmm. So the idea is like, people like your country's food, they might want to come and visit, or at the very least, they have like a stronger positive association with your country or your culture, right?
Country marketing.
Yes. So there's a term for this. I'm going to bring up sports one more time, and then I promise I'm not going to again. It's very relevant.
Nicole, you're such a jock.
Yeah, I'm so athletic. I love to do cartwheel. There's another term that's relevant here. There's a lot of vocabulary today. There's this term called sports washing. This term gets brought up when countries like Qatar or Saudi Arabia will buy like a European sports team, right?
They can do that?
Or like, oh yeah, well yeah, it's like any other business, right? You just like become a majority stakeholder in the company that owns the team.
All right.
I mean, yeah, you can buy a sports team if you have enough money.
I know nothing.
Oh yeah. So I'm not into soccer, but people that are into soccer have pointed out that, some of these countries that are investing a lot in sports, that sort of the goal is like, no, like Saudi Arabia is a really good country, super cool. We don't have any human rights abuses. Love football, right? We all love it. It's really good. And not to say that like the United States is perfect, obviously. Those are just countries that I know have been explicitly accused of sports washing. So I would say that you can do a similar thing with food, right? If you invest enough into like, oh, food from our country is super delicious. And like maybe if you're David Fairchild and you like bring it to your country, everybody's like, yo, I love these mangoes.
Yeah.
Where do mango come from? I want to go to Mango House.
Mango House.
But how do you get your food to other parts of the world so that people can try it and therefore become endeared to your country and its culture? If you don't have David Fairchild, that is. Well, if you are Thailand, and, I guess I'm being more specific of like, if you are the government of Thailand, you just start your own ding-dang restaurant empire.
Ooh, I'm listening. I love Thai food. Or at least American Thai food, which I think is where this is going.
We'll get there. Yeah, so
Okay.
In the early 2000s, the Thai government initiates this project called Global Thai. So the goal is to launch thousands of Thai restaurants all around the world, with the majority in the U.S., to boost Thailand's economy and tourism. So the government says, like, we are going to invest in creating a bunch of Thai restaurants to better our economy and get people to come here.
Whoa.
Now, Thai food is already taking hold in the U.S. before this, largely due to a thriving community of Thai immigrants in Los Angeles. So, according to scholar Mark Padungpat, Americans get their first real taste of Thai food during the Cold War in the 1950s and 60s. We have some military members who are over there, Peace Corps volunteers, and the like. And they're like, oh, this food really good. And they kind of write home about it. Then 10 to 20 years later, we have lots of university students who come from Thailand to the U.S. to study, and they're like, well, I gotta eat. I can't just be eating burgers and pizza all the time. I miss my Thai food. So then they start opening their own restaurants, and specifically in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is really important because it's sort of the epicenter. It feels so loaded using that word, like in post-COVID times,
Does elicit disease.
It's giving measles outbreak.
Whew.
Oof. Anyway, so LA is like really kind of how Thai food spreads more broadly across the United States. So in the 1980s, Americans are very invested in celebrity culture, right? What's Madonna doing? What's Michael Jackson doing? Where are the movie stars? What are they doing? Where are they going? And the short answer is they're in LA and they're eating at Thai restaurants. That's not the entire way that like Thai food spreads across the United States. You, of course, have immigrants coming from Thailand, moving to the U.S. and spreading out to other parts of the country. But the celebrity culture of the 1980s in Los Angeles is definitely like a key point in the expansion of this cuisine. Mm-hmm. Which brings us back to the Global Thai program initiated by the Thai government in the early 2000s. This is a much more concerted effort than just like the government of Thailand saying like, yeah, go open some restaurants, you know. This has got millions of dollars in startup funds.
Ooh.
They developed robust supply chains of restaurant equipment, tableware, ingredients, spices, like everything you would need to like outfit a restaurant. Because the point, right, is that these chefs are going to go elsewhere, but they're going to need the stuff from Thailand to like operate an authentic, quote unquote, Thai restaurant. The government also opens cooking schools in Thailand to make sure chefs that they are sending across the world are trained in how to cook Thai food properly, aka how the government wants them to like standardize the cuisine. I was reading an article from this early 2000s period where they were talking to some like minister of the economy or something, and he said like, we want to make sure that you're getting like real Thai food, that like the Thai food that you get in America is not real Thai food. We want to make sure people are getting real Thai food, which I think is super fascinating for like a government to say, I don't know, to like be the authority on that of like what is the, like standardize it, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sort of like how we were talking about like Americanized Thai food, which I would argue is like not wrong, but is a different version of like, you know, as things move from country to country, things get adapted, right? Things change.
Absolutely.
So you might be wondering, Julia, this whole government enterprise, does it work?
I'm thinking about all of the Thai restaurants that I know about, and I'm going to say yes.
It does. Yeah.
Yay.
So let me give you some numbers. So in 1990, there were roughly 500 Thai restaurants in the United States. Okay, 500.
Okay.
In 2000, the year 2000, only like 10 years later, there are over 2,000 Thai restaurants.
All right.
In the U.S. specifically, and then globally, excluding Thailand, because that would, I think, skew your average a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
There are more than 5,000. And then in 2011, well after this global Thai program was like well underway, the number jumped to over 10,000 Thai restaurants worldwide.
Oh, wow.
That is a lot of tom yum soup.
I am thinking about, like, everywhere I have lived, there has always been at least one Thai restaurant. It's like a Chinese restaurant. Same but different, right? Where, like, there's always a Chinese restaurant. Those are usually, like, not very high quality, but there's always a Thai restaurant that is at least of pretty good quality. Or maybe, like, 2 or 3. Like, when I was living in Silver Spring, my God, there were probably, like,
you probably
4
couldn't
or 5.
spit without hitting a Thai restaurant.
Yeah, honestly. And there's some that were, like, so good. And I miss them terribly. Yeah, I'm, like, thinking now, I'm like, oh, my God, you're right. Between the years 2000 and 2011, there were so many Thai restaurants showing up.
As part of the global Thai program, the government actually developed 3 different like types of restaurants, right? A cheaper option, a mid-range, and then a high-end like type of Thai restaurant. And they give you like the whole plan and everything. It's like basically like a franchise, right?
Wow. This is blowing my mind a little bit.
Let me give you some more numbers. Obviously, with opening all these restaurants, this does also help the economy of Thailand. I don't know what the numbers are now, but the article that I was reading, which was from 2001, said that Thailand earned more than $6 billion in food-related exports. So, like, specific ingredients that you need to make Thai food. And they made, this is the wacky part to me, more than 1.6 billion exporting restaurant supplies. So just like stuff you need to run a restaurant, which apparently includes bronze Buddha statues, which is, I don't want to seem insensitive, but if you told me, like, name some restaurant supplies, bronze Buddha statue is not going to be the first thing I think of.
It's not going to be, like, the 12th thing I think of.
Yeah. Because also think, this is billions of dollars in 2001 money, right?
Yeah, man.
I can only imagine what it is now. But, this really made me think of, like, I remember something you said back when we first started the podcast of, like, the food that we eat, like, how did it get there and who put it there, you know, and how these things always seem like very like, oh, just happenstance, but it's actually very intentional.
Very intentional, incredibly curated. There is nothing here that you eat in America that is here naturally or by accident.
Right.
It is all orchestrated in one way or another, and I find that endlessly fascinating.
Which I think brings us back to botany.
Indeed, it does. So, Nicole, are you ready to get wiggy with it?
Let's get wiggy.
Okay, so for all of our listeners, trigger warning. Up front for the second half of the episode, there will be mention of sexual assault. No details, no more than just a mention. But to not mention it would be to glaze over our next topic, Jeanne Barat, her real trauma, and would be disingenuous to her actual story to leave it out. So please listen with care, or you can just skip the second half of this episode entirely. Totally understand.
You're all good, fam.
Yeah.
We got you.
So now that we've talked about the glorious life of David Fairchild and his food expeditions, we're actually going to go back in time even further to meet the incredible female botanist, Jeanne Barat, who was the first woman to circumnavigate the globe, and whose life, like I said, was very far from glamorous in comparison to Fairchild's botany expeditions. But first, we need to mention the herb woman. Barat's knowledge and skill as an herb woman is what made her a leader in botany, even if she was not actually allowed in the male scientific realm at the time.
Right, women can't do science because it makes their uterus go cray-cray.
Oh yeah.
We all know this.
An herb woman, just for basic definitions, is one schooled, usually orally, in the curative properties of plants. Herb women were, for a very long time, the suppliers for male medical practitioners for the raw ingredients for tinctures and cures, so apothecaries, druggists, surgeons, dentists, they all relied on herb women's supply and knowledge of plants to give them, things to help with infection, things to help numb pain, things to help staunch bleeding. They all relied on these women who were out there actually in the field.
Literally.
Yeah, literally in the field.
Literally in a field.
Yeah, literally in a field. So, as an herb woman, Baret held botanical knowledge that surpassed all the scientists of the age. It was so well known at the time, and this is 1700s, that ordinary women would know what plants look like in the field, while supposedly male, educated scientists only know, theories about plants and what they're told. Since this was, such a common concept, it was often the punchline in jokes. There was one specifically that was, a bunch of scientists sitting for dinner at a table, and this one guy is I'm gonna play a joke on them. And he's what do you think this plant in our dish tonight is? It's new and fancy, and everyone's all the dude scientists are oh my gosh, it must be a new varietal from Indonesia or whatever. I've never seen such an herb. And then the host calls in the one of the maids who helped make it, and she was oh yeah, that's cilantro.
I love that.
So it's this was so just in the cultural mind at the time, that women actually knew the plants and men only knew the theories of the plants. Herb women had the unrivaled knowledge of the plant kingdom, but the men were the ones who enjoyed the social status and power that came with that knowledge. So any sort of recognition, any sort of payment, any sort of status as a leader in the field would never belong to these herb women. And that is because women were not allowed in the sciences, because the sciences were way, way too sexy for women.
Yeah.
Taxonomy, the classification of all living things, is based on family resemblances and uses a Latin naming structure to identify each unique species of plant and animal. You know, it's
right.
Why we have a Latin name for every animal and plant. The system that we use today was created by a Swedish botanist, Carl Linnaeus, and when his system of taxonomy first came out, it was considered obscene by peers at the time. Why? Because Linnaeus placed plants into groups based on their reproductive strategies.
Oh.
So please read this paragraph in purple, an excerpt from The Discovery of Jeanne Barat.
Trying to help his readers grasp the idea of vegetable sexual reproduction, Linnaeus explained the sexual reproduction of plants with analogies taken from human relations. For example, The calyx is the bride chamber in which the stamina and pistilla solemnize their nuptials. Is it nuptials?
It's nuptials.
That's
I think
fine.
nuptials is cute. We can keep that. So yeah, as you can see, incredibly steamy stuff.
So steamy, I can't even read it. Don't even know how to say
it. You as a woman are going to be way too embarrassed to even conceive of any of this. So we can't even have you learn it, you know. So this is kind of the time period that Jeanne Barat was born into. She was born in 1740 in a very small French town to parents who were serfs. The illiteracy rate at the time was 80% for men and 90% for women in her sort of class and area. The life expectancy of her community was a measly 26 years of age.
Ooh.
Due to poverty and back-breaking labor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Live fast, die young, bad girls do it well.
Exactly. So, 90% of women at the time in her community could not read. But because Baret's mother was an early modern Protestant, and that religion focused on reading the Bible themselves for worshiping instead of listening to Mass in Latin, Baret was actually literate. This is also proven through, the one piece of text that exists today that might have actually, and is probably her writing. It is a manuscript, one that is now claimed to be that of her ex-lovers, but it's not his because handwriting's different and he wouldn't have known all this stuff anyway. That details different herbs and their uses. It's basically like a handbook of an herb woman. So her ex-lover, Philibert Commerson.
What a name.
I know, right? Was an up-and-coming botanist at the same time, and unlike most of his peers, he did not think that herb women were beneath him. He thought of them as peers. And so he and Baret met around 1760. She's 20 years old. And a relationship grew between them. First, a scholarly relationship, where Commerson wanted to gain all the practical knowledge of botany that he could from Baret, and Baret was learning from him anything she could. And then, after Commerson's wife died, Baret moved in with him as his housekeeper, quote-unquote.
Oh, and they were roommates.
Yeah, and they were roommates. And their relationship turned from scholarly to a romantic one filled with Enlightenment science, sexy times, and tons of plants in their house. It's pretty much clear that, Commerson and Baret's affair did not start until after the death of his wife. It's not like he was cheating on her. But he did give up his kid to his brother-in-law because he didn't want to keep him.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. This is going to be your running theme.
Huh.
So by 1764, Baret was 24 and Commerson was 36.
Okay.
And she was pregnant with his child out of wedlock. They never married.
Ooh.
And they moved to Paris to be less conspicuous as a bizarre, unmarried couple with a very pregnant lady. Baret changed her name to Jeanne de Bonnefoy. The de in the name indicated that your family owned land, so she was putting herself up as a higher class than she was when she was living in Paris.
I love that,
Oh, yeah.
Move to a new city, get a new haircut, and just might as well, there's no census, there's no
man.
Everyone's making everything up at this point in terms of documentation. Why not?
And again, Baret was a literate, incredibly intelligent woman. She knew exactly what she had to do to fit in. When she finally had her son, Commerson did not care for the baby and essentially demanded that he was to be given up to the Paris Foundling Hospital.
Aww.
Baret, in a tradition that was common at the time, left her son with a trinket so she could hopefully come back and identify him and be reunited with him at a later time. Unfortunately, the baby boy died before making it to his first year.
That's so sad.
I know, it's so sad. Her life just gets worse, man.
Oh, no. So a foundling hospital, is that sort of akin to an orphanage, I guess?
Yeah, it was specifically created in Paris because of this endemic problem where young mothers were just leaving their babies at hospitals and orphanages and wherever they could because they couldn't take care of them. And so the government was like, we gotta do something about this man. And so they founded the Paris Foundling Hospital, which was essentially like an orphanage, but also like with medical staff to care for these kids and help put them in different care centers and foster homes and things.
I didn't think that like that thing in movies where, you know, like there's a mother who's like, I'm sorry, my precious little child, I must leave you. And they just leave like a bundle on some steps is apparently like truer than I thought it was.
Oh yeah, no, people did that. Yeah, so she probably did intend to come back for him.
Why did Commerson not want him? Like, he just didn't want to be burdened down with children, it sounds like.
He didn't want kids. He just wanted to live his science life. He just wanted to be a Enlightenment scientist. He wanted to focus on his work. He didn't want to focus on family or managing a household or anything. And he was absolutely a narcissist, just based on what I read about him. But he could be, when he wanted to, be, like, very charming. And then when he didn't want to be, or didn't feel like it, he was an absolute nightmare.
Boy, does that sound familiar.
Yeah. So, like, having a kid wasn't in his best interest. Also, again, they weren't married, right? So it's not like she could have demanded to keep it.
Yeah.
As, like, a woman living as his, quote, housekeeper, she really didn't have that many rights to her own child.
Yeah.
So, while Baret has no writings of her own, her botany exploration around the globe is told through really what is intense investigative journalism done on the part of the author of the book that I read, The Discovery of Jeanne Barat, in which the author used 4 journals of men who were on the voyage that Baret was on. This includes, like, the captain, Commerson, a different captain, and this one Tahitian man who joined them on their trip. And so, through those 4 journals, the author puts together Baret's story. And again, the investigative journalism that had to happen here is really
that's
insane.
impressive.
It really is. It's also, like, a really fascinating yet depressing book, and I would also recommend reading it. So, in 1765, Commerson was hired as a field botanist to go on a sea voyage circumnavigating the world, and I mean, like, all around.
Ooh.
Like a full circle, to find spices and other native plants that they could bring back to France to make money.
Yeah.
Specifically spices.
Oh, yeah. That's where the big money is.
Yeah. And if you could figure out how to grow those fancy spices on French-owned land and not just import them, you would be making absolute bank.
Mm-hmm.
And so Commerson needed an assistant for his botany explorations, but the best person who could have been his assistant was Baret, but she was unfortunately a woman, and women were prohibited on French ships unless it was for the transport of civilians, which this would not be. This would be a government-sponsored botany expedition. So, you know, Baret and Commerson decided that, like, what's the best thing we can do? Oh, Baret should just disguise herself as a boy assistant. And so that's what she did. She wore a bandage to bind her chest every day, and she figured out how to talk and how to walk and how to try and blend in as much as possible. And her name didn't really change that much. It changed from, like, Jeanne Bonnefoy to just Jeanne without the feminization of the N, double N and the E. Unless I'm pronouncing her name terribly wrong, and then I'm so sorry.
It's too late.
It's too late, you know, now.
That's what it is now.
So, not only did she have to live with linen bandages binding her chest every day, which, you know, as we know very well today because of the medical research around, like, trans people, binders can be very painful.
Right.
They can be very constricting to your breathing. They can overheat you. If you are wearing them 24/7 like she would have to, it's not very good for your health. So she had to deal with that physical pain and uncomfortableness. But it also took mental fortitude to do what she did. As the author writes in The Discovery of Jeanne Barat, to construct and retain the fiction of Jeanne Barat, the male, required keen powers of observation, a quick wit, a good sense of humor, an abundance of drive, and an endless reserve of stamina.
It'd be pretty dedicated, especially if this is, like you said, you're going around the whole world.
3 years.
Yeah, this is not like I'm just for a little weekend, I'll just be in disguise.
Exactly. And unlike, media would have us believe today that you as a woman can probably get away with pretending to be a man for as long as it takes to take down the Huns in China.
Yeah,
or whatever.
I was going to say, I keep thinking of Mulan.
Her disguise was pretty instantly seen through. Given her status as just an assistant, it was expected that Baret would sleep in the ship's belly with the other assistants and lower class men, and that she would use the same lavatories as them. I'm using lavatories very loosely.
Bucket.
Holes, actually, to be more precise.
Well, yeah.
The same, bathing, also very loosely, area, etc. She would be expected to share these spaces with all of these men. And the fact that she kept to Commerson's room was incredibly suspicious. And people at first were like, are they gay? There's gay stuff happening. And then they were like, no, I think that's a woman. When the captain finally, confronted them about it and was like, no, I demand that Baret sleep with the other dudes in the belly. Baret had to, think quick on her feet, and she spent one night down there, and it was she had to sit with her pistol the whole night. Because, people were like, what's going on? We want to find out. And she's like, don't you fucking come near me. I got a gun. Yeah. Terrifying experience. And so after that, Commerson really was like, she's got to stay he's got to stay in my room, dude. And the captain was like, why? And Baret was like, because I'm a eunuch. This was, very clever of her at the time because sailors were terrified of becoming eunuchs. Because there was this moral panic about the Ottoman Empire, and if you got caught or kidnapped or your ship was taken over by one of the Ottoman Empire's ships, that they're gonna turn you into eunuchs and all this stuff. So Baret was like, I'm hopping on that moral panic. I am a eunuch, and people were like, okay, I don't really want to touch that any further.
Yeah, it's saying why'd you miss work? I had diarrhea. Actually, I don't need to know anything else. Never mind.
Exactly. But coupled with, her excuse of being a eunuch and also that Commerson would need constant tending to because he had a leg wound that would just open up and bleed all the time, which was actually true.
Oh, okay.
He had varicose ulcers caused by a dog bite.
Oh.
So, his leg wounds would just open up and bleed and become, gangrenous.
Seems like you should get something checked out.
Yeah,
maybe.
So she did actually have to take care of him 24/7. And the captain was like, we're already out at open sea. I can't really do anything about this, so sure.
Yeah.
You're a eunuch. You're not a woman. That was, the open secret.
Right.
Basically, from the beginning, was that Baret was a woman, but no one was really going to push that further.
Don't ask, don't tell type of situation.
Exactly. So, during her voyage, Baret had to deal with the terrible eczema that came from her constantly bandaged chest because of the salt water and the sun and the heat and the sweat. She had to deal with horrific seasickness. She had to deal with the constant threat of sexual violence from the rest of the crew because, again, it was an open secret that she was a woman. She had to deal with starvation and heat stroke and almost freezing to death. And that was just life on the ship. That wasn't even when she was actually in the field doing botany itself.
I imagine that was probably better, You get to be outside.
It was in some ways, because she actually got to be away from the crew and everything else.
You just get to hang out with your plants.
Yeah. Because even though she was technically just Commerson's assistant, due to his varicose ulcers that basically disabled him, Baret had to do all of the actual field work whenever their ship landed on a new landmass. And this included, carrying a butt ton of gear. And so, with a binded chest in tropical heat, Baret would carry probably close to 30 pounds of gear across untrailed terrain to find specimens to keep in research. Commerson, in his journal, would describe her as his beast of burden, which is kind of gross, dude.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure she got, all of the credit for all of this work that she's doing on Commerson's behalf, right? For all of the, manual labor.
Oh, yeah, all the...
And I'm sure she got paid for it and well-known and acclaimed. I mean, we all know her today, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's what happens.
She's incredibly famous, and more so than Commerson, even though she did all of his actual work. And, her manuscript is definitely under her name and not his.
Yeah.
And all that great stuff. No. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, she had a pistol on her at all times, even sleeping with it, even when she was in Commerson's room, because she had to protect herself. Unfortunately, and this is where we're going to get into essays, so forewarning, her and Commerson's voyage ended prematurely when, after several months of starvation and no fresh water and no progress during the voyage, the ship landed on New Ireland, which is in Papua New Guinea, and the tensions were already so high on the ship that the second Baret had a moment of vulnerability on the island when she was washing some clothes in a freshwater stream, she was sexually assaulted. This assault resulted in a pregnancy,
Oof.
which would be a very bad look for every official on board when it would come to light eventually that a woman had illegally made her way onto the ship and no one did anything about it, and then was brutalized and no one did anything about it.
Yeah.
And then gave birth.
And it's a government ship also,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a real bad look.
Like, there would be probably corporal punishment for this. And so the captains and officers were like, we can't do anything, or we don't want to do anything about the assault, because that would be admitting that we had let a woman on board.
And admitting that, like, we were part of the problem also.
Yes, exactly. And I am including this unfortunate event because, like the author Glynis Ridley states, we are at least allowing the fullest account of her experiences to be given, and when sexual violence is added to the catalog of conditions within which she lived and worked, we are enhancing the nature of her achievement.
Yeah.
She had achievements. Like, Baret was incredible. She was the first woman to ever circumnavigate the globe. She was a leader in botany at the time when she wasn't even allowed near the door.
Mm-hmm.
She collected more than 6,000 plant specimens
Wow.
from literally around the world. Like, again, they went all the way around. France through the Panama Canal before it was the Panama Canal, and back around to France.
Wow.
So much of her contributions are lost to time and written under Commerson's name. But we do know, like, the most famous of her discoveries is the, I don't know how to say this, I'm so sorry.
Bougainvillea?
The Bougainvillea? Again, it's French. I don't speak French. Bougain was the captain of the voyage they were on, so it's named after him. And I have a picture there, and it's a very popular Mediterranean plant. Yeah, it's very pretty.
Very pink.
People will be like, oh yeah, you know, she was a woman, she liked the pretty things. But no, she picked up that plant and brought it back for research because she thought it would help cure the infection in Commerson's leg. Because a similar plant in France looked like very similar to this plant and was used for that sort of thing. And so she was like, this might also have the same properties.
My God. The thing that she's most famous for, now I need to yell, the thing that she's most famous for is the thing that she gathered to try to cure her lover who stole all of her accomplishments and got the credit for, oh my God, I need to go lay down. Ugh.
I know, right? But, you know, back on the ship, to essentially fix the problem of a pregnant Baret, the expedition, like, booted her and Commerson off at, like, the first French-controlled island they could find, which was Mauritius, which is next to Madagascar. And this is so funny. The guy who ran the island at the time was also a French botanist, famous French botanist.
Everybody's into botany. You know, it was the craze at this time.
It really was at the time. His name was Pierre
Poivre?
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 I don't know.
How much of this episode is going to be us just trying to pronounce French words?
Probably the next 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But, Nicole, you might know Pierre by a different nomenclature. Do you mind reading the rhyme that I forgot to highlight in purple?
I do. I know this one. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked?
Yeah, so Peter Piper was an actual dude. It was Pierre Poivre, or Poivrier. I don't know how to say it. But that rhyme is based on him as the botanist. He's a real dude. It's wild.
Wow.
It's wild.
And he was in charge of Mauritius, whole
he was
island.
In charge of an island. So Baret would spend 7 years on that island. She would inconspicuously give birth to her next baby, and she put that child in the care of one of Commerson's colleagues who was also in the area. She did not want to keep that baby.
I cannot blame her.
Yeah. And then also Commerson probably didn't want to keep that baby. You know, it's a track record here. Again, there's a trend.
A little bit of a theme.
Yeah. And then she spent her time on the island caring for Commerson until he died from an abscess that burst in his chest, which is what's documented. What? I don't know what that means. If it's like heart attack or cancer or whatever. I don't know. It's like 1770 or whatever.
They're just guessing.
They're just guessing. You know? But his death more or less left Baret destitute on the island, as she had no rights to Commerson's wealth or things, since they were not technically married.
Right.
And they would not let her back into the house that they had shared together. So with literally only the clothes on her back, she started her herb woman work again and started working at the local tavern to build up funds to go back to France. So while working at the tavern, she met Jeanne Barat.
Sure.
A French regimental sergeant who was also from the rural area of France where Baret grew up. They got married, and because of her new husband's status, they were able to return to France with ease. Although it could have been a marriage of just convenience, it seemed at least a marriage of companionship. They remained together for the rest of her life, living in the small town where her husband, Baret, grew up.
That's nice.
Yeah,
you know.
So she had at least, like, a nice quiet end to her horrific life, which, by the way, by the time she was back in France, she was only 33.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, then again, she's doing much better than people in her hometown who only lived to 26.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and people in her hometown usually only went as far as they could go on foot in terms of mileage, so maybe like 12 miles past where they lived. She not only outlived him, she lived to be like 67, but she also went around the entire world. She did incredible things for a woman of her background at the time, including, you mentioned earlier that she never got paid for her work. She actually did get paid for her work. After she returned to France, she demanded 600 francs that were left to her in Commerson's will, and she got them.
Hell yeah.
The French government was like, I don't want to deal with you, so just take it. Just take it.
Love that.
And she used this money to buy her and her husband a comfortable home with some income to spare.
Nice.
Not only that, but about 9 years later, she demanded compensation and recognition for her work, and it was given to her.
Hell yeah. We love women getting credit for their accomplishments.
So I have a document from the French Naval Archives that I'm going to send you.
The quote reads, Jeanne Barat, employing a disguise, undertook the circumnavigation of the globe on one of the ships commanded by Monsieur de Bougainville. Using her time to help Monsieur de Commerson, doctor and botanist, she shared all the work and danger that the philosophy exposed himself to, showing great bravery. That her behavior was exemplary is acknowledged by Monsieur de Bougainville. When Monsieur de Commerson died, this person, whose sex was known, married one Dubernat, lately a non-commissioned officer in the Royal Comtois Regiment. Now, Madame Dubernat and her husband, having reached that time in life that brings infirmity with it, are not able to earn their daily bread. The minister has therefore graciously bestowed upon this extraordinary woman a pension of 200 livres per annum to be paid from the fund for invalid servicemen. This pension shall be payable from 1 January 1785.
Girl got her government pension, man.
As she should. That's the least she can get, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
You know? She just needs a little retirement money.
Yeah, she not only got her government pension, she also got, like, government acknowledgement for the things that she did.
Yeah.
And kind of like in a happy twist, there is also now a plant named after her. In 2012,
Ooh.
a species of nightshade was named Solanum Barete in her honor. Look, guys, I don't know French or Latin. I'm doing my best. But now that we have talked about David Fairchild and Jeanne Barat, let's do a slight comparison of the two stories, shall we? David Fairchild was filled with glorious adventure as a white, wealthy man with government status. Meanwhile, Baret faced legitimate horrors trying to do the same thing because she was a woman of low status and was not hired by the government to do what she did. But that doesn't make her any less of an equal in terms of her botanical contributions and her knowledge and her scientific acumen.
Yeah.
It's just that, like, if you are a white wealthy man, you get to stay in 5-star hotels while you're in Java. And if you are a low-class woman, you are sitting in your cabin with a pistol so you don't get attacked.
Yeah. I think it really speaks to, like, the author of the book was talking about, of, like, how it's even more incredible, like, how much she accomplished in spite of all of the, like, many roadblocks and challenges and the horrors. Not to, like, diminish, you know, David Fairchild still did cool, important stuff, too, but, like, he just had an easier time of it because of privileges.
And it's kind of like that baseball analogy where it's like, David Fairchild was on third base to begin with. Did not take a lot for him to make it back to home base. But Baret had to start from the beginning and actually hit a home run to get all the way around.
Yeah.
And like you said, like, Fairchild contributed so much to what we see in grocery stores today and to, like, what we eat. And it's really incredible. But I think it's also always important to highlight the women who came before. And their contributions are just as important. Because I've mentioned this before, but food is an evolution, right? Like, it does not just start with one person discovering or creating one thing. There is a evolution of people coming before that continually evolve on a food, or food culture and what we eat is constantly evolving, and you can't really pinpoint when something became something.
Yeah. Now let the record show that Julia brought up sports again, and I did not.
Oh no!
You can't blame me. Oh no.
All right.
Thanks for lunching with us.
We'll
and
see
we'll
you
see you
next
next time.
We'll never get that in sync. Bye.
Yeah. Our theme music is Red Onions by Louis Zong. Please check out the rest of his album, Vegetable Soul, in the description. If you have an episode suggestion or want to say hi, you can email us at girlslunchpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. I want to say that Schmeagol has busted his way in here. At the moment, he's just sitting in the recliner outside of this recording studio. He's just laying on the chair, but he's watching me through the, like, little crack in the...
He's producing.
Yeah, he is. He's a script supervisor.
He's our producer.